Hello, hello. I'm Casey.
And I'm Fallon.
And this is
Render the Darkness.
Okay, so I will be doing the episode today. And the episode today is called The Doodler.
The Doodler.
Mm-hmm. Before we get into that, I will give you today's worldly fact, which is that ketchup used to be sold as medicine. Apparently, back in 1830, it was sold under the name tomato pills, and the claim was that it could cure things like jaundice, diarrhea, and indigestion.
Interesting. I wonder how that would work.
I don't know. Okay, so the case that I have for you today, to me, is very interesting, and I have no idea how I've never heard of it before. It takes place in the 70s, and it took place in San Francisco. I will say ahead of time that this case is centered around the LGBT community that existed there at the time.
Okay.
So before we dive into details of the case, I think it's important to set the scene for what all was happening, not just in San Francisco, but kind of all over the country at the time. There was a huge prejudice against the LGBT, especially towards gay men. Mm-hmm. Even though there was the gay liberation movement that took place in the late 60s to early 70s, which intended to make it more accepted, it really wasn't. Especially when most locations that the LGBT existed were still being ran by men that weren't open to the idea at all.
Oh, wow.
It seems like it was pretty widely felt by the members of the community that they had no safety. They didn't feel they could go to the police in most cases because they felt like the police didn't really value their lives at all or anything they had to say. This was especially true in San Francisco, who at the time was ran by an almost entirely quote-unquote conservative police force. So much so, they actually had a policy in place that restricted them from hiring anyone in the LGBT community.
Well, that's not cool.
An example of this prejudice was a case that happened around this time in 1973 where two police officers pulled over a gay man and proceeded to beat him until he suffered brain damage.
Oh my God.
The department was even quoted as saying that LGBT people were, quote, of a bad moral character, quote, end quote, and that they would never hire a, quote, covert homosexual, end quote. So just yet another really trying time for the LGBT community. It was common knowledge in the community that the police felt this way, essentially leaving them with no sense of protection whatsoever.
Wow, that's terrible.
Also happening at this time was the Zodiac Killer, the zebra killings, which I will be covering very soon.
The zebra killings?
Mm-hmm. I've never heard of it, so
I've never heard of that.
Very interested in that, and that is on my to-do list for sure. And also Patty Hearst, which was consuming the bulk of the police investigation focus.
Okay.
So because all of this was going on, it's believed that the Doodler was able to get away with anywhere from 5 to 15 murders.
Dang.
5 confirmed and 9 suspected.
Wow.
He also had 3 survivors. However, these survivors were all of high social standing, so none of them were willing to be involved in helping catch this person.
Oh, wow. You think it was because they were embarrassed that it happened, or?
Well, no, I think it's because they were concerned that since at the time it was so anti-right to be gay that a lot of them didn't want to be outed. They were closet, and so
I got what you're saying. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
It's okay. No, I'll touch on that more a little further into the case as well.
Okay.
Also, I should say he was called the Doodler because it's believed that the way he would convince these men to meet him in places or take him home with them is that he would literally draw like character sketches of them or just sketch them in general. And this really seemed to, unfortunately, opened the door for him to convince men that he was trustworthy.
Okay, I was gonna ask you why he was called the Doodler, or the Doodle. Sorry.
Nope, the Doodler.
Oh, the Doodler. Okay.
It's the Doodler.
Okay.
But yeah, that's why. Because he would literally, whether it was like on cocktail napkins or whatever he had handy, he would do character sketches of them.
Oh, that's interesting.
But none of the sketches were
Good.
No, they weren't. The police never had any in their hand to say if they were good or bad. They
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll quit.
Nope, you're fine. The first victim, as far as police know, was a man by the name of Gerald Earl Kavanaugh. He was found on Ocean Beach in San Francisco near the Golden State Park on the east side. But it was believed that before he ended up here, he had been at a nightclub called Castro. He was found on January 27th, 1974 at 1:57 a.m. He was found lying on his back looking up, and rigor mortis had already begun to set in. For those of you who don't know what rigor mortis is, it is the stiffening of the joints and muscles of a body a few hours after death caused by a lack of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, in muscles after death. ATP is the cellular energy that the body requires in order for the muscles to contract. Anyway, sorry, went down a bit of a medical rabbit hole there. Back to the case. He was stabbed multiple times. According to CNN, it was a total of 16 times.
Dang.
And had defensive wounds on his hands. He was fully dressed and still had $21.12 in his pocket and a Timex on his wrist. So I think it's safe to rule out the idea that this was an attempted robbery, but whoever had done this did take anything he had on him that could potentially identify who he was, so he was originally classified as a John Doe until he was later identified by family.
Okay.
I couldn't find just a whole lot of information about him, about Kavanaugh. I did find that he was born in Canada on March 2nd, 1933. He moved to San Francisco and was working at a mattress factory, and that he was of the Catholic faith. So he was buried in the Holy Cross Catholic Cemetery in Colma, California. He stood 5 feet 8 inches tall and was around 200 pounds.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the crimes against the LGBT community weren't uncommon. Combine that with the very little evidence they had and all the other homicides being committed all around the city at the time, and the people the police didn't initially seem to investigate this murder too much from the beginning, but they did seem to know that he had been at the Castro the night before he was found. It wasn't until the next victim that investigators started to feel like there could be a connection.
Okay.
The next victim's name was Joseph Stevens. He preferred to be called Jay. He was born in Texas but moved to San Francisco in his teens because he felt he could be more open there. He was said to perform as a drag queen at a nightclub called Finocchio's. It was located near North Beach, so it was also close to Golden Gate Park and in the same district area as the Castro.
Okay.
Although he had been doing this for 8 years, he had recently been trying to transition to comedy.
Oh, nice.
Stevens was seen leaving the Cabaret Club after a stage performance on June 24th, 1974. His body was found the following morning on July 25th, 1974, by a woman walking her dog.
Aww.
He was found in Spreckles Lake, also close to Golden Gate Park, and was lying in some bushes. He was 27 years old at the time of his death. He too had been stabbed multiple times, 5 times to be exact, and it said that he was beaten beyond recognition.
Dang.
Just like Kavanaugh, Stevens' identification had also been taken. The body was later identified by Stevens' sister, Melissa Stevens Honrath. His body was found only 1 mile from where Kavanaugh had been found in Ocean Beach. Stevens' car was found at the scene, so it's believed that he drove himself to the location, but not much else was noted about this murder either.
Huh, so you think, he went there with somebody and...
That is what the police think.
Okay.
Either he met somebody there or they traveled there together.
Yeah, okay.
The Doodler's third victim was a German national by the name of Klaus Christmann. He was 31 years old, and from what I read, he was just here visiting some friends. He had only been here for about 3 months at the time of his murder. He was also said to have had a wife and 2 children back in Germany.
Oh, no.
He was last seen alive at a known gay nightclub called Bojangles. His body was found on July 7th, 1974 by a dog walker on Lincoln Way, which is the street that takes you from Golden State Park to Ocean Beach.
Oh,
Which,
wow.
if you remember, is where the first victim, Gerald Kavanaugh, was discovered, and it was only 2 miles from Spreckles Lake, where Jay Stevens' body had been found.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so these are in pretty close proximity.
Yes.
Wow, okay.
Something that was different with this murder is seemingly Christman's death had been far more brutal than Kavanaugh's or Stevens'. There was an investigator by the name of Dave Toshi working on this crime that had also worked on the Zodiac Killer case, and even he described the Christman murder as, quote, the most vicious stabbing he's ever seen, end quote.
Wow.
It was so severe that the coroner thought it looked more like the killer had attempted to decapitate Christman rather than he was just stabbing him.
Wow. I wonder if he tried to fight back, and that's why maybe he got.
Yeah, possible. One thing that was the same as Kavanaugh and Stevens' deaths, Christman's identifying information had also been taken.
Okay.
They noted that his pants were undone, which made them assume that Christman was at this location to participate or indulge in some kind of sexual activities. And they also found a tube of makeup in his pocket, and the fact that he was wearing orange bikini shorts underneath his pants kind of made the police draw the conclusion that Christman may have been working as a drag queen in secret.
Okay.
At this point, police were really starting to believe these 3 murders had to be connected to the same killer and officially began investigating the murders now as a serial murder case.
I would agree with them.
I'm going to include what the investigators' initial working theory was, just because I think it's an interesting glimpse into the mindset of humans regarding other human beings at the time, especially those in an authoritative position.
Yeah.
It just fascinates me.
Okay.
Their theory was that the killer was working a, quote, place of shame, end quote, participating in gay sexual acts and then acting out against their romantic partners during or afterward. I don't know. To me, just the way that they make it sound, it's almost like they're implying that the victims were being found or picked up in seedy places or something. I don't know. Just the way it's worded.
That's what it sounds like to me.
I may have completely misinterpreted what they were saying, but the shameful comment kind of bothered me for some. Anyways, moving on.
Yeah, I understand.
I couldn't see where this case got just a tremendous amount of press at the time, but I did see that the Sentinel, which was an LGBT publication, they did run several articles on the victims and that the murders had all officially been linked. So there were some efforts being made to get the information out to the community, letting them know that all 3 victims seemed to have met someone in a remote location in or near the beach or Golden State Park, and that the victims were being stabbed as well as stripped of all their identifications as well as their properties, so to be on high alert.
Okay.
Because I don't know if I said it or not, but Jay Stevens actually he had his identification taken, but he also had jewelry taken. Linking of these murders, one of the major problems here was that there were other murders happening. There was even a concern that there may have been as many as 3 active serial killers at large all at the same time. The police followed leads all over the city. They talked to patrons of Castro's and to people in what was known as the Tenderloin District, and they also followed every lead they got in every other predominantly gay nightclub there was in the area. The next victim, or at least who was thought to have been the next victim at the time, was a man named Frederick Elmore Capin. I hope I pronounced that right. His body was discovered by a hiker on May 12, 1975. He was lying in a sand dune approximately a quarter mile from Ocean Beach, where again, as a reminder, Gerald Kavanaugh, the first victim's body, was found.
Okay.
Something that was a little different with this scene, opposed to the others, was that there appeared to be drag marks at this one. They estimated that Capin had been drug approximately 20 feet. Even though he was found on the 12th, it was determined he had been deceased around 10 hours before being found. But just like the other victims, he had been stabbed multiple times. In fact, the cause of death was said to be a stab wound to his aorta.
Oh.
Capin was 32 years old at the time of his death. He was from Washington State and was a decorated Vietnam veteran. He was a medical corpsman in the Navy. He was living in San Francisco, working as a registered nurse. He was quickly linked to the other 3 murders that fit the profile because of the way he was murdered, the taking of his identification, and the location.
Right.
Police and investigators had to be very cautious who they linked to these murders in the case because there were so many other homicides taking place at this time.
Okay.
His next victim, or thought to be, was a man named Harold Goldberg. He kind of steered away from the previous pattern of the killer in the sense that Goldberg was a bit older than all the other victims. He was 66 at the time of his death.
Oh, wow.
He too was an immigrant. He was from Sweden. His body was discovered on June 24th, 1975. It was determined that he had been deceased for about 2 weeks.
Oh, dang.
His body was found in Lincoln Park. His underwear was missing and his pants were unzipped. He was the last known official murder victim, although there were 3 survivors, as I mentioned earlier, whose names were never released from what I could tell. There seems to be a total of actually 16 potential victims that could eventually be linked to this particular killer.
Okay, now I got a question about the gentleman we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they're saying that he was dead for at least 2 weeks.
Yes.
Now, was he in the park for that long, or was he somewhere else and then put in the park?
I don't know. I didn't find where it specified that.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not sure. That'd be something interesting to look up.
All right.
At the time, DNA and fingerprints weren't really a thing, but as technology has developed, there have been some discoveries in the case. For example, there was another victim linked to the Doodler case who's thought to be the actual 4th victim. He was a lawyer by the name of Warren Andrews. He was 52 years at the time he was found. When he was found on April 27th, 1975, which means the attacks actually happened before Frederick Capin, who you might recall was found on May 12th, 1975.
Right.
Andrews was found at Land Inns, which is located in the same area as, you guessed it, Golden State Park. Although he was unconscious when he was found, he was still alive.
Oh.
He had several wounds, and unfortunately, he would succumb to his injuries 7 weeks after being found.
Oh, that's sad.
It took them so long to link him because of the manner in which he was killed. Okay. Unlike the others, Andrews appeared to be beaten to death with a rock and a tree branch.
Oh, wow.
That was according to the medical examiner. So he didn't seem to fit the MO.
No, because all the other ones were stabbed.
Right.
Okay.
However, in 2021, the San Francisco Chronicle and the cold case detectives decided to re-examine Andrews' case, and it was then that they linked him to the other murders as well. The reason they believe Andrews was murdered in such a different way compared to the others is that perhaps the killer lost his knife amidst the struggle with Andrews, and so he kind of just had to use whatever he had available. It is also assumed by information given by Andrew's family that he was a closeted gay man, which also adds to the reason for linking him to this particular case.
Okay, I can see why maybe the rock and the tree branch was used then.
All of the murders happened within the span of 18 months and all in a radius of 4 miles from one another.
Okay.
They all happened in predominantly gay areas, mostly in the Castro district, and all occurred in not only secluded areas, but also in areas close enough to the water that any sounds of struggle could have easily been, no pun intended here, but drowned out.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Between these killings, the other homicides happening at the time, and the other known violent assaults, it's safe to say the members of the gay community were scared.
I bet.
1 month after Goldberg was found, in July of 1975, the first survivor of the Doodler's attempted murder, known only as the Diplomat, his name was never released. He stated that he was approached by the killer at a truck stop, and after being swooned for a bit, he invited him back to his home. According to him, once the killer had asked to use the restroom, and when he came out, he was holding a knife, exclaiming, "You guys are all alike." It's assumed he was referencing gay men in particular when he was saying this.
Okay.
The Doodler then proceeded to stab the Diplomat 6 times in his back.
Ow.
I don't know how. Must have been some kind of adrenaline or something, but somehow the Diplomat managed to throw his attacker against the wall, causing the attacker to run out of the apartment and flee.
Wow.
Luckily for the Diplomat, at some point early on in the attack, the knife blade actually broke.
Oh, wow.
So none of his wounds were life-threatening.
Oh, so like broke before
Then, right.
Wow.
The blade broke.
That is
before.
definitely lucky.
So this is the point when the killer started to get a little sloppy. He actually convinced another man just a few days later to take him back to his apartment. This man lived in the exact same apartment building that the Diplomat lived in.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's just... I mean, I'm glad he was stupid, but that's just stupid.
So now this time, and I assume it's because he struggled with the Diplomat so much a few days before, this time he tied the victim up.
Okay.
And was just about to stab him when the neighbors began banging on the wall due to the noise. When that happened, the attacker fled again.
Okay.
It should be noted that during this attack, the attacker was again repeating how, quote unquote, they're all alike, again believed to be directed towards gay men.
You know, I wonder if, like... This is just my... Well, I'll wait till the end.
Okay, so... let's discuss the suspect. They had a suspect that they were going to charge, but the problem they had was because all 3 survivors were still believed to be closeted and didn't want to take any chances of being quote-unquote outed, they all said that even if the attacker was brought in, they wouldn't help in any way. The 3rd survivor was said to be an actor who was really well known at the time. They had gone back to the actor's home where a knife fell out of the killer's coat, and this is when the actor actually fled from his own home.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Despite that mindset, though, they did all 3 give pretty much the exact same physical description of the Doodler.
Oh, that's good.
He was suspected to be a young black man between the ages of 20 to 25. He was around 6 feet tall, slender, but strong, and he was said to have quote-unquote kind eyes and a charming personality. Once they had this physical description, they were able to release a composite sketch, and the tips came flooding in. There were several witness accounts, and by witness accounts, I mean people claiming to have seen the man, with many people saying he frequented gay bars and nightclubs.
Okay.
It was also assumed he may have been an art student because he had told one of the surviving victims that he studied commercial art.
Oh.
He also was said to regularly wear a Navy-type watch cap. He was said to be well-educated and of high intelligence. It was also suspected that he had some mental struggles with regard to his own sexuality and had at one point been seeing a psychiatrist as an outpatient.
Okay.
So they had some pretty in-depth details about this guy. In July 1977, it was claimed that the police had gotten the Doodler's license plate number and even gotten information leading them to his psychiatrist. And when the psychiatrist was questioned, he admitted that the particular patient they were asking about did confess to the murders, but for some reason, seemingly, nothing ever came out of that.
Nothing. They didn't follow up. They just nothing.
Well, let me rephrase that. They didn't arrest a suspect.
Oh, okay.
Let me put it that way.
Okay.
The problem they had again was that none of the survivors were willing to come forward, one of which they couldn't even find at this point. It was nearly impossible to make an actual arrest. Okay. There was a suspect brought in at one point who was reportedly picked up at a nightclub because he was offering to draw sketches of people, and when the police searched him, it was found that he also had a sketchbook full of sketches and a butcher's knife.
Just carrying a butcher's knife with a sketchbook.
And I could not find what the sketches were of, but they were of something. I'm going to assume not people, though, because it was also said that the police didn't have any of the sketches. So,
okay.
They arrested him for possession of a weapon, and he ended up attacking the inspector. And but ultimately ended up only being charged with aggravated assault and was released.
Okay.
After that, it seems like the news and reports about the Doodler just slowly started to vanish. He was mentioned in 1978's Tales of the City, written by Amistad Maupin, fingers crossed on the pronunciation of that one, where he said, quote, "The Doodler, a sinister black man who sat at the bar and sketched your face before taking you home to murder you," end quote. And I think there may have been one more time, but then he pretty much just kind of fell dormant and just off the map.
Huh.
That is until 2019 when the case was reopened.
Oh.
The case is actually still open. And in 2019, the San Francisco Police Department not only released an age-progressed composite sketch of what the Doodler might look like now, but they also offered up a $100,000 reward for any information leading up to his arrest. And then in 2022, they upped that reward to $200,000. And it was upped again in 2023 to $250,000. Which I believe is what it still sits at to this day, as, again, the case is still open.
Dang.
They're really hopeful that with all of the new advances in DNA testing, that they'll eventually be able to identify the killer, or at the very least, be able to link more victims to the case. They actually do still have a suspect in this case whose name I couldn't find, but the last interview I could see that was done with him was in 2018, where he still claimed to have nothing to do with the murders. The suspect is the same suspect who they had the license plate number for and whose psychiatrist they spoke to.
Okay.
So he's been a suspect since the 70s.
Yeah.
It's suspected that this person is a frequent traveler and may even have killed more men throughout the years, but they don't know that for sure. I will definitely attach a link in the show notes that will take you to the age-progressed sketch if that's something that you're interested in seeing. The police do believe that there were more surviving victims that were attacked that just simply never came forward that might still be alive.
Okay.
And that's what they're really hoping for, to
Right.
get some kind of an attachment to either putting faces and names to the other victims or getting the killer found and tracked down.
Right. Okay.
But since this case is still open, I wanted to add that if you or anyone you know has any information about the Doodler or his crimes, you are asked and encouraged to please call the San Francisco Police Department's 24-hour tip line at 415-575-4444 or text a tip to tip 411 and begin the message with SFPD. Tipsters and callers can always remain anonymous, so if that's something of concern, just know that you do not have to disclose your identity.
Okay.
And that was the case of the Doodler.
Wow.
I'm sure I left some things out. I had never heard of this case.
Nope, not at all.
Which was crazy because I thought I had heard of the bulk of existing serial killers, at least in the United States.
Yeah.
Especially with everything that was going on at that time with the Zodiac killer and all that. But, researching this case, I came across several that I had never heard of.
Well, like you said, with all that going on, a lot of it probably just got swept under the rug because it's, Zodiac killer, and so a lot of it probably just didn't get picked up on.
Right.
But I mean, I do want to say something about the suspect. What I was gonna say is, he keeps saying that you guys are all alike.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, do you think it maybe, just my opinion, at some point in time in his life, he did come out to somebody or something, and they either made fun of him, or they not really made fun of him, but
Shamed him in some kind of way.
no, I can't put my brain to it right now. Rejected him. Like he made advances, to a guy or something, and they rejected him, and ever since then he just started getting upset, and
It's absolutely possible. Who knows the psyche behind why any people do the things that they do when it comes to these kinds of things. I do know that I did see in an article somewhere of the suspect that they are still looking at. I know in one of the interviews, I think the 2018 video interview, he had said something to the police about him being healed of his quote unquote gayness.
Okay.
So if that is the killer, I know that to me, that particular suspect saying that seems like he believed that it was a sickness of some kind, or
Right. I think a lot of people back in the day thought that. They really did.
Yeah, it's hard to say because you don't know who the actual killer is.
That's true.
So it's hard to say what his mindset is because you can't ask him.
Yeah.
But like I said, I do know that because of the times when these things were happening, I feel like maybe some things were missed.
Yeah.
And not really focused on at the right times that they should have been focused on. But I am really happy to see that the case is still open, because a lot of these older cases like that kind of go cold and then they kind of get shelved and then they never really get looked at again.
Yeah.
So it's good to know that the police department is still actively seeking a suspect in this case, or the killer in this case, and I'm really hopeful that one day they'll be able to solve it and maybe get some form of justice somehow, some way.
Yeah, I agree. Hopefully, well, I mean, with the advances in technology and all that stuff, it's hopefully it'll happen soon.
Hopefully, but yeah,
that was a really good case.
Thank you. As always, we are on Twitter/X, Threads, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. We now have a Apple Music account, so we can now be heard on Apple Music and Amazon Music and Spotify. And we have our email address, which is just renderthedarknesspod@gmail.com. I promise if you comment or if you email us, we will respond to you.
Yes.
Every time. We will respond to you every time. It may take us a day or two to get to it, or to see it even sometimes.
Right.
But you will always get a response.
Yes, always.
And given that information, I would like to say that I am happy to say that my next case will be a listener recommendation.
Mine too.
Which is a great segue into saying that we welcome listener recommendations very much,
yes.
And opinions from our listeners. And, we are all about the listener engagement. So please feel free to reach out to us if you want to with any kind of recommendations for any kind of case.
Yep, anything at all. Anything you're...
strange, weird, true crime, paranormal, folktale, legends, cryptids, lore, whatever.
Anything.
We'll cover it all. We have no bounds. So, that's our case. And we really appreciate you spending your time with us today. And we appreciate each and every one of the listeners that we have and the potential listeners that we will have. And
yes, you are very, very muchly appreciated.
So that being said, we are
Render the Darkness.
Bye.
Bye.
And we are
Render the Darkness.